The important task of the photographer is to convey to the viewer the most characteristic gestures of the person being portrayed. And this is just as important as showing the characteristic expressions of their face. Here a small digression is necessary. A normal person still expects that the photographer will not use them as a soulless mannequin, but will create a portrait as a reflection of that person's individuality. And even now, when naturalness and individuality have long been in fashion, the internet is full of outdated advice of the sort: 500 best poses for a photo shoot. Of course, in photography, there are no clear boundaries and rules. You can easily mix styles, eras, and experiment with poses at your discretion. There are no bad poses, but there are unsuitable ones. Before shooting, a photographer needs to think about the effect they want to achieve. What are they photographing? Clothes, style, pose, era, or the person, and based on the defined goals, construct the shooting process. So, let's assume that the hands of the person being portrayed are as important as the face. But how do you manage them during a shoot? The answer is obvious. You should manage the hands in the same way as you manage facial expressions. Try to create the right mood and stop thinking about posing. Distract from the thought that there is a camera present at the shoot. It's not always easy, but this is the skill that the photographer needs to develop. Everyone develops their own tactics on this issue. Some photographers, when asked by the model out, "What should I do with my hands?" simply give the models an object or even an item of clothing to hold to relieve the tension. The model's hands will take a comfortable position as soon as she stops thinking about them. The more you distract the model from thinking about the shoot, the easier it will be to create lively photos. A great way to distract someone is through conversation. Don't know what to talk about? No problem. Organize some action, even something very simple. The model will always be busy and will think less about posing. But most importantly, such actions will force the model to express themselves. When the model is doing something, it will be easier for the photographer to see favorable positions of hands, legs, head. Catch expressive emotions. The photographer must always observe and catch the right moments, timely adjusting the model's position if necessary. But how to understand which moments to catch? When and how should you start correcting the pose? Here only experience and constant practice can help. Shooting and reviewing the photos taken. Yes, it's long. Yes, the first shoots will be terrible, but you will learn. Take more photos, and during the shoot, change the scenes more often. Make portraits at home, on the street. Anyway, the main thing is to keep doing something. Don't be afraid to seem silly. Start with quantity, and quality will come with time. As we've already said, think of some activity for the model. And an excellent option for such activity is to suggest the model copy some poses. Take a selection of photos that you like to the shoot. Sometimes, to amuse the model, you can even take that very selection of the 500 best poses, but not to copy them completely, but to have a starting point, to get the model moving and opening up. The first half hour of shooting should allow the model to be distracted from the camera and catch the right wave. It's important to learn to feel the state when the model is attuned. And then you will only need to catch the most successful moments. How to understand that the moment is successful? Familiarity and experience. To train this feeling, look at photographs of great or simply good photographers. If you still don't understand how to determine if a photographer is good or not, there is a simple but effective way. Most often, famous Hollywood actors are photographed by good photographers. So, look for artistic photographs of your favorite actors. See in what poses they are photographed and try to take these poses as a basis. And by the way, look not only at how they are photographed, but also at what they are dressed in. The choice of clothing also greatly affects the perception of the pose and the frame as a whole. But you don't need to copy the poses exactly. Let these photos only be a starting point from which the pose that best suits your model will develop. In the end, you may come to a completely different pose. That's normal. Just try to avoid visual mistakes in posing. What are these mistakes? And there are positions of the hands, legs, head that subconsciously don't look very attractive to the viewer. For example, when the fingers on the hands are not visible, or a hand appears out of nowhere, when bent knees or elbows are pointed towards the lens, and the like. This issue has been studied in detail by William Mortensen. We recommend reading his works, but don't get too carried away. Too correct poses can look overly contrived. You should watch out for mistakes, but you don't need to be afraid of them. Sometimes mistakes can even lead you to something new and interesting. It would also be useful to understand how different gestures can be perceived by the viewer. You can read the books of the popular Australian author Alan Pease about the language of our body. Although his observations do not have a serious scientific base, they will still make you think about something and may be useful when shooting a portrait. And don't forget that your own gestures can also affect the result. If you constantly hide behind the camera and clutch your head, you are unlikely to radiate confidence, and the model must trust you and understand that you are in full control of the process. We hope you will now have a better understanding of what to do and how to act during a shoot. The most important thing is to be yourself, not to seem like someone else. Observe and draw inspiration from real life. How often do you see a girl on the street in such a pose? Even if you do, you will most likely have doubts about her normality. People in everyday life rarely use screaming poses. Over the years of evolution, we have learned to notice and read the subtle nuances of the interlocutor's facial expressions and hand positions, just as we have learned to express emotions and interact with others using gestures and even the smallest changes in facial expression. Our face and our body do not have to scream to show something. Often, in order to attract attention, it is better for our body to speak in a whisper. The ability to read subtle nuances is what makes portrait photography so interesting and makes each portrait unique.